All right, we ready for baby's first JavaScript? Cool. First, we're going to need some HTML. Now, on CodePen, we don't actually have to put HTML, head, body, and all that stuff. You just start making the body. So let's do it. Let's just put something here. How about a big, fat button? You like buttons? Buttons are cool. Yeah, button. So what is that I just made? What's that called? All this crazy angle bracket stuff. It's a what now, Jake? It's a tag. In fact, it's two tags, an opening tag and a closing tag. Together, they make what kind of entity? An HTML Thank you, Megan. Element. That's right. It's an HTML element. What kind of element is it? It's a button. Yes, elements are made of tags, opening and closing. Some don't have a closing tag. We call those empty elements. Things like image and line break, stuff like that. Input in a form. So button. Suppose we want some text inside that button. Let's suppose. Now that I've supposed, I'm going to make it so. Make it so, get it, Picard? He was bald too. And he's cool. See? Patrick Stewart's cool as heck. Okay, let's make a button. Let's make a button that says, say yeah. All right? Yeah. Yeah. Except it's more like, yeah. That's more like what I'm talking about. So we want this button to actually do something. We could write scripts that just run as soon as the page loads, but where's the fun in that? Most of the time, what we're going to be doing is telling JavaScript, when one thing happens, do something else. So most of the time when the page first loads, we're just going to say to JavaScript, hey, JavaScript, start listening for this thing to occur. When it does, I want you to run this.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
You said that you could go ahead and cascade that. Would you do that normally? Have them run and then run them sequentially right after the other? Or are you concerned about loading times, stuff like that at all? Or not?
So what? Can you rephrase that? I'm sorry.
You said earlier that you could go ahead and make the say yeah, and then you would have to wait for it to do it, then go to the next order and execute. Would you run them sequentially? Are you always running them sequentially like that?
Like event listeners?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's always listening for everything that you're listening for. And it happens very fast. It's not a huge concern unless you're like listening for a trillion things. But yeah, it's not really much of a performance concern. So basically, it won't do it on this monitor. It won't do it on this monitor. Well, dang you, I'm just going to shut this. Here's what I'm trying to say. When something happens, do something else. So when what happens? An event of some kind, do something else. React to that event. That's an awful lot of what we're going to be doing in this class. So let's do it right now. There's several ways that we could do this thing. Either way, it seems like we need the button. JavaScript needs to know about that button. How do I get that button off the page using JavaScript? Anybody know? Anybody know how to get that button off the page? Don't be shy if you know. Yes, sir. Yeah. You do not have to, sir. But go ahead and finish that thought.
The way I was usually told to do it is document.getElement by ID or getElement by class or whatever.
Okay. So anytime we're dealing with the DOM. Ooh, what's the DOM? The DOM is how your HTML document is actually represented inside the browser's memory. It parses your HTML and creates the DOM out of it, which is this tree-like structure that has every element on the page. And anytime you're manipulating the DOM, you start with document. And that document object has lots of methods on it, some of which are useful for things like grabbing elements off the page. You have things like getElement by ID. That totally does a thing as long as it has an ID. What's an ID look like? Now it has an ID. So now we've got an opening tag. Inside that opening tag, we have the element name button. And now we have this other thing. What's that kind of thing called? What's ID? What is class? What are those things called? Do you know? Talking about the anatomy of an element. We're getting to selectors. Yes, sir. Attributes indeed. So ID is an attribute. The thing in quotes is an attribute value. Good thing to know. So we could say get element by ID, string the button, single quotes, double quotes, doesn't matter. Does it matter? No, just be consistent. So for the sake of consistency, we're going to use single quotes in this class. The only difference, truly the only difference, is whether you have to backslash escape the single quote key or the double quote key. So if I'm using a single quote string and I need to say don't, well, heck, it's going to think that's the end of the string, isn't it? I'm getting an error. Unexpected identifier. Groovy. So I would have to say backslash. Whereas if I use double quoted string, I would have to backslash any double quotes that appear in the string. But there aren't any in this one anyway. That wouldn't be a legal ID. Yeah, chill out. I'm getting there. But we're not going to use getElementById, though we could. If there's any way for us to grab an element off the page without adding to the markup, we're going to try to do that. But heck, well, let's leave the ID on there for right now. What's another method we could use to grab it from the page? Anybody know? Yeah.
Isn't there something along the lines of getElement by tag name?
There is by tag name. That exists too. Yep. There's another one that can do all of the above. It can get it by ID, it can get it by tag name, it can get it by class. It can do all of them, all with one command. Anybody happen to know what it is? It's got the magic word in it. What was the magic word, Ferris? Selector. Know what a selector is? Anybody know CSS at all? CSS rules consist of a selector followed by some stuff inside curly braces. The selector tells it which elements on the page the rule applies to. Well, you can use those to grab things with JavaScript these days now too, using something called query selector. So query selector takes as its argument a string with a CSS selector in it. And there's also query selector all. Query selector all will find all matches. Query selector will just find the first match that it comes to in the DOM. So if I wanted to get it by ID, now what would I put in there? I do not just put the button, because now I'm dealing with CSS selector syntax. Anybody happen to know selector syntax for an ID? Yeah, indeed, hash. Just like that. And unless your Uncle Dave's lying to you, which I would never do, that should give us the button. I'm going to put some line breaks in here just so I can make this a little smaller. Got my button. All right, so let's save it to a variable. How do we create a variable in JavaScript? What's the key word? I hear a lot of muttering. I hear some var. Anybody say anything other than var? Oh, let or const. Fancy. What's the difference? Do you know that? Scope is the difference. It's also a mouthwash. We're going to talk more about the differences in a couple of days. Maybe tomorrow, maybe the next day. But yeah, we could use var. So var button equals that. Or we could say let or const. Here's what we're going to do. Var, that's pre-ES6. ES6 introduced let and const. So we're going to use those because they are better. We'll get to how they're better a little later. But they're better, so we're going to use them whenever possible. The difference between the two, let and const, is that variables you create with let can be reassigned later. So I could say let button equals that, and then I could say button equals 4, and that would be fine. Could not do that with const. They're not true constants, and they're not totally locked. If it were set to an object, we could still manipulate that object. If it were an array, we could still add and remove things from the array. That would be fine. We just basically can't reassign them with another equal sign once they're created. So that helps us to avoid some errors as well. So we're going to use const unless we know we need to use let. So as a general rule, when we create variables in ES6 and higher, we're going to use const. We'll use let if we have to reassign things. For example, in a for loop, if you have I that needs to be reassigned all the time, you're going to have to use let. That's probably the first case we'll have where we need it. We'll see. Aquafina is also noisy. Const button equals that thing. Is it all true? Does it work? Let's try something. Alert button. There we go. Object HTML button element. Seems to have worked. I don't have any semicolons on this page. Generally, we put semicolons at the end of statements. Guess what? I'm not gonna. I live on the edge. Doesn't matter. JavaScript has automatic semicolon insertion. They are optional. They've always technically been optional, but there used to be big problems if you left them out. There really aren't anymore. So what would happen is in order to save space, you'd run your scripts through a minifier first. Anybody know what that means? Minification? What's minification, Sam? Takes out all the white space, and it renames your variables to be as short as they possibly can be, stuff like that. Basically, it makes your script take up absolutely as little space as possible to save with network traffic. To do that, it has to have the semicolons in there, right? Well, back in the old days, it wasn't smart enough to put the semicolons in where they actually belong. These days, the minification scripts that people use are smart enough, so they really are optional. And last year, I made the decision to stop using them in class. And I'm afraid to change that habit now. So I'm not going to use them. My advice for life is do whatever your employer wants you to do. Just be consistent with the house style. Every place you work will have an opinion on whether you should do it or not. So just do what they do. It's fine. I happen to know for a fact that my next client's going to make us use semicolons. It's fine. By the way. Not a big deal. I'm pretty sure. They use semicolons. You'll get used to it very quickly. So, also, I just think React is a lot prettier without them. All right. Button equals that thing. So what? What can we do with it? We saw this, right? We want something to happen when that event occurs. So we need to tell it when what happens, and we need to tell it what to do. How can we do that? How can I make something happen when something happens to the button? Anybody know? What's that? Event. Yes, we want to wait for an event to happen. What event do you think? Click. We could do it when the mouse goes over the button, but that would be silly. Let's do it when we click the button. How do I do it? How do I make something happen when I click the button? Anybody happen to already know? Yeah. What?
Event.onClick or no?
.onClick? What were you going to say?
On the button, isn't it like just Onclick equals like whatever code you want to run or something?
Right, that totally works. Let's do it. Button.onClick. That tells me when what happens, right? The event in question is click. And we set onClick equal to what? What did you say?
Just whatever like the function or whatever you want to run is.
The function you want to run when that occurs. Yes, indeed. So we could say onClick, and we can make a function right here, like that. We can totally do that. That would be an anonymous function, a function that doesn't have a name that we're just using this one time. We could totally do that. Or we could make a separate function. Either way, let's make a separate function just for demonstration purposes. Const, say, oh, yeah, right. Different syntaxes for creating functions. Simplest is a simple function declaration. Function, say yeah. Like that. Totally works. Button onClick equals, say yeah. Do I put open close parentheses here? What do you think? Why not? What am I setting Onclick to if I do?
The return value of say yeah.
Right. If I put the parentheses here, I am setting Onclick to the return value of say yeah. But say, Onclick needs to be set to an actual function because we're not the ones executing say yeah. JavaScript's going to execute it for us when the click occurs. So we want to actually pass the function itself as the value of the Onclick property. You can totally pass functions around just like any other variable. They're first-class citizens here. In fact, one of the other syntaxes for creating one of these, instead of saying function say yeah, I could say const say yeah equals anonymous function. Basically the same thing. There's a subtle difference, but basically the same thing. You could just set a function to a variable and you end up with the same thing. So what should it do? How about we make it alert? Yeah. Think it'll work? Yeah. Totally works. Good times. There's another way besides setting the Onclick property. There's a downside to setting the Onclick property, in fact. You know what the downside is? One of them is that what happens if I say button.onClick equals something that says nope. What's going to happen when I click the button now? Is it going to say both? Is it going to say nope? Nope. So when you assign this property, it blows away any value that that property previously held. So that could lead to some accidents. So we've got another way to do it. Anybody happen to know what the other way is? Yes. Holy smokes. Look at that. Alex with the fancy tricks. Add event listener. So on any DOM element, we can call a method called add event listener. Add event listener takes a couple of arguments. The first argument, well, it's these arguments, the two blanks. What event are we listening for, and what do we want to happen afterward? So, click is the event. Say yeah is the function. Not say yeah, open close parentheses, right? That's the return value of say yeah, which is undefined. Just the function say yeah. Does it work? Yeah. Not getting my vibrato right on that. Excuse me. Yeah. That's a little better. Yeah. Yeah. It's not there today. I don't know. Yeah. Yeah. What's going on? It is Aquafina, man. I don't know about this stuff. What are they doing to the water in California? Exactly. All right. But hey, that totally works. That's a thing. Add event listener. Now saying yeah is the most interesting thing we could do. We promise we can actually change things on the page, right? So we've got a button here. It's got an opening tag. Inside the opening tag, it's got the element name. It's got an attribute and a value. What's this? What's between the opening and closing tags? It's contents. So everything between the two tags is the content of the element. What kind of content we have here? Just some text. It could totally be other elements though, right? But right now, the only content we have is text. How about say contents? I don't know. We'll rename this to say contents. And then what we'll do is say whatever it says here. So I've already got the button, right? Button How do you think I get the content out of that? Anybody happen to know? Yes. Inner HTML. And I'm sorry, I don't think you have your name tag out. Can you remind me your name? Jake, that's right, other Jake. Thanks. Inner HTML. Come on, you. Why doesn't it have... Oops, I need an alert here. Yeah. Alert. It says, say yeah. If I make the button say, click me, it says click me. Totally works. If I say, click me, emphasis, EM, usually manifests as italics. But emphasis is a better way of saying that than I. Because it's not necessarily italicized. What if you're using a screen reader? Well, screen reader recognizes emphasis and will pronounce it differently. Here you go. Click me. Now it says click EM, me, EM. So it'll actually put the HTML. What if I just want the text? There's another property called text content. As a general rule, property names in HTML are camel-cased like that. Lowercase first letter, each new word is uppercased. Now in that original 10-day sprint, the original 10-day sprint in which Brendan Ikes wrote JavaScript, he wasn't always super consistent. But we can't break old code, so we still have to deal with those inconsistencies. But anything that was added lately is going to be camel-cased. And some of the old stuff's camel-cased too. You'll notice Onclick was not. Text content, though, camel-cased. And yes, it's case sensitive. So let's see what this gets us. Now it just says click me. So we can get it that way. Can we change it? You think? Let's try. Let's say button.textContent equals click. Think it works? Click. Totally works. I just changed it. What if I didn't have an ID? What if I had a class instead? Class equals button thing. How would I change the selector? If hash is ID, how do you denote a class in a CSS selector? Who knows? Yes. Say it again? Yeah. So, dot button thing. Totally works. I hope. Let's see if it still works. It does. What if I didn't have either one? And I just wanted to get it by element name. What's the selector for that? Yes. Just button. Yep. So the simplest selector is tag name. Now this will, since I'm using query selector, only pick the first button off the page that it comes to. If I did query selector all, it would return a thing that kind of looks like an array. It's technically called a node list, but it works a lot like an array, containing all buttons on the page. But just query selector. So as far as ID and class goes, when might you choose to use each? What's the difference between an ID and a class?
An ID is when you only want to act like on one element.
Yeah, so you can only have one element on the page within a given ID. But you can have many elements on the page with the same class. Now, HTML is very fault tolerant. Browsers will put up with it if you do the wrong thing, but they may behave unpredictably if you do. Like, which one are you going to get when you say get element by ID? Well, probably the first one. I don't know. Maybe the last one. I honestly can't remember because you shouldn't do that thing. IDs should be unique on a page. Classes do not have to be. They're for classifying things. IDs are for identifying things. So let's put something else on the page. Let's put a big fat H1. a level 1 heading. It says JavaScript. Let's make the button change that. Oh, cuss. Can we do it? What do I put here now? To make an apple pie from scratch, you must first create the universe. To do something to our H1, we must first get that H1 from the page. Were you saying something? Const. Let's make ourselves a new variable. Const, how about heading equals, what am I trying to do here? I'm trying to grab that heading from the page. So what do I type? Anybody else? What do I type? You know what to type. It's the same thing I did earlier, except now I'm grabbing the H1 instead of the button. So what do I type? I don't have the H1 yet. I have to get it off the page first and save it to a variable, just like I did the button. Document.querySelector. Pass it the string H1. That ought to do it. And then I can say H1.textContent equals I less than 3 JavaScript. Not like the haters. Uh-oh, oh, cuss. What's going on? That's right, heading, not H1. Why didn't I get an error? That's fair. I have no idea why I didn't get an error. I should have. In that case. I less than 3 JavaScript. It works. Congratulations. What have we done? We said when one thing happens, do another thing. Now we're getting pretty good at this. We're old pros. We know how to identify elements on the page using selector syntax. We know how to do it with an ID. How do we do it with an ID? How do we do it, Kim? ID. And I want to use query selector. What do I put in there? I just kind of did it with my hands too. Yeah, hash. I've got a class. How do I identify it by class? Hunter. Instead of a hash, if it's a class, what do we do? Class instead of hash. Excuse me. Class instead of ID. With ID, it's a hash. With class, it's a different symbol. What symbol would it be? What do you think? What do you think, Ryan? Dot. That's right. Dot for a class. For just a raw element name, you don't need a symbol. Just say button. Just say H1. Whatever. Works fine. Cool. Well, I think we're ready to get crazy.